Good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure it is to welcome Alice Feeney to the Poison Pen, alas not in person, but joining us from England. Welcome, Alice.
Hello, lovely to see you.
And you. Unfortunately, she has right behind her her third novel, His and Her, on display, as do we. It is our British Crime Club Book of the Month at the Poison Pen, and we have plenty of copies if you're interested in ordering them. So, Alice, let me just give a little introduction here. You're a writer and a journalist. You spent years at the BBC, where you were a reporter, news editor, arts and entertainment producer, and 1 o'clock news producer. What's the 1 o'clock news? Is that a really significant British program?
It's our lunchtime bulletin on BBC One in England. So it's watched by lots of viewers, especially at the moment with people desperate to know what's going on in the world.
So, what prompted you to segue from this excellent career into writing a book, which is a lonely enterprise and quite different than the work you were doing?
Well, I think even as a little girl, I always dreamed of writing novels, but I'm not sure I ever believed that I'd be able to do it. And then a few years ago, I started really trying. I wouldn't just start and stop. I'd write entire novels, send them off, collect the rejections, of which there are many, think about giving up, but I just couldn't. I had to keep going. And then one day I wrote a book called Sometimes I Lie, and I sent it off. And then suddenly everything changed, and suddenly I had an agent, and suddenly I had publishers, and everything has been like a dream come true ever since.
That is exciting. Well, your debut novel, as you pointed out, Sometimes I Lie, it was the New York Times an international bestseller, translated into over 20 languages, and good news, is being made into a TV series by Ellen DeGeneres and Warner Brothers, starring Sarah Michelle Gellar. Wow, that is
Mm,
exciting. Plus, His and
I know.
Hers is also coming from the company behind Normal People and Killing Eve, and Jessica Chastain will be starring in it. Two at once.
I know it's been quite a wild roller coaster ride the last couple of years, and I think I've pinched myself so often my arms are sort of covered in bruises. But no, that's been just such an amazing dream come true. Something I didn't even dare to imagine actually, and I can't wait to see the characters come to life on screen. It's been very exciting.
Does your background, and I don't mean this in any way to be a cheeky question, as you might say, but does your background at the BBC and so forth, do you think make it more likely that people would look at your books in terms of video or film?
I don't think so. I remember when I was a child, I read a lot. I often felt as though I were Matilda in real life. And I also watched a bit too much television. And I always remember my nana telling me that if I kept watching too much television, I was going to get square eyes, which terrified me. I used to check the mirror on a regular occurrence to see have they gone square. But I think that love of television and that love of books and that love of storytelling in all formats hopefully comes through in my own storytelling. And hopefully, maybe that's why some people could see how it could work for television as well as for novels, even though it isn't something I particularly thought of at the time. And I do remember when I got the first phone call about Sometimes I Lie, I almost tried to talk them out of it because I kept trying to explain the main character was in a coma and how could that possibly work on screen. But luckily, nobody listened to me, and they're still going ahead and they're making the show.
Well, I was going to ask you that question next, so I guess we'll both wait for the movie and see. Well, you probably have seen Rushes. Are you involved in that to some degree?
I try not to get too involved, as exciting as it is, just because I feel as though I've waited so long to be allowed to write books every day that now that's what I like to do. I literally sit in the shed most days with my dog, tapping away, writing out the next books. But everything I do know, a lot of which I can't share, is so exciting. And the plans that they've come up with together with Warner Brothers, it's just so exciting to hear about, and I can't wait to see it. But it's all moving forward, and hopefully sometime next year we'll all be able to watch it together.
So, what prompted you? It was a really gutsy thing to do. What prompted you to have a woman in a coma as the figure around which Sometimes I Lie revolves?
I think whether or not I mean to, I always end up writing about the things that scare me the most. And I remember I was in a accident in France years ago in my early 20s, and I was knocked unconscious. And I woke up in the hospital, and I didn't know where I was. and everybody was speaking a foreign language, and there was a doctor trying to take my clothes off and get me into hospital gown, and it was absolutely terrifying. And then I passed out again. And so I think that's just one of those experiences that for me was just one of the most frightening things that had happened to me, where I felt completely out of control. So I think that probably sparked the idea somewhere. But all of my books, even the ones I'm writing now, do tend to be about things which scare me the most. And I think that might be why quite often my own books sometimes give me nightmares.
Aha. Well, let's see. Sometimes I lie. My name is Amber Reynolds, and there are 3 things you should know about me. I'm in a coma. My husband doesn't love me anymore. And sometimes I lie. And that's the little précis. Fascinating. You wrote a second book called I Know Who You Are. Tell us a little bit about it. I'm asking you because we haven't had the pleasure of talking to you before, so I thought we might catch up before we get to his and hers.
Ask away. I Know Who You Are is about a character called Amy Sinclair, and she's an actress. And I had Amy in my head for so long before I got to write her. And it was such fun to write her character when I could actually just get to sit down and spend time on my own with her. And I always remember little things about Amy would affect how I felt. And I would find myself buying clothes that I would never normally buy, or behaving in a way when I was driving my car that I would never normally do. And it was quite a wild ride, actually, writing that novel, and so much fun. And I think it's quite a dark novel, and I love it when people can understand and relate to Amy in the same way that I do, and sympathise and understand why she is the way she is.
Do you think that there'll be interest in bringing Amy to the screen also?
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see. Fingers crossed. I think I've been incredibly lucky so far in terms of the screen shenanigans that are going on behind the scenes. So fingers crossed, we'll wait and see.
Well, I asked, not every book seems to translate to another platform. I mean, we know so many authors. I mean, this is our 31st year in business, so we have actually walked the career of an incredible number of authors from their very beginning to their enormous success, or sometimes moderate success. It all depends. And film is such a checkerboard kind of a thing. You can't ever. We can't even, knowing the authors and reading their books, we can't predict which ones might make that transition. But we're the Outlander bookstore. Diana Gabaldon lives here. She's my neighbor, a friend, was a customer. And so we've had the experience of not only going through all of her books with her, but going through the entire translation of Outlander to the screen. And she's been very fortunate that they've done a sympathetic treatment and one that she likes. But we've also talked to other authors who loathe their movies, who've really been unhappy with it. So really, the only sensible thing, it seems to me, is when you sell it, is just kind of step back and abandon it.
I think definitely. I think for me, as soon as I hit send on a book, as soon as I send my book even to my agent, from that moment on, it's not really yours anymore as the author. Writing that first draft for me is such a special, precious time, because that's when it's just me in the book. It's just me and my characters and nobody else. And I don't tell anyone what I'm writing, much to the annoyance of several people. I don't tell them anything. I don't tell them the title. I don't tell them the subject matter until that first draft is done. And then I think once you send the first draft out, from then to edits, to publication, to the possibility of a TV series, it's something that's a shared experience. So I love reading readers' different interpretations of my books. I love that so many people have different views about what the end of Sometimes I Lie means, and I'm very excited to see the TV series, and if it isn't exactly the same, that's completely fine. I'm just excited to see someone else's interpretation of the story.
There was a time, I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan, and there was a time when there really was a distinction between reading or writing as a solipsist activity, something you did alone, and watching, viewing as a community or shared experience. But now in this pandemic, even viewing has gone back to being much more of a solitary, maybe a household experience, but It's not like we're all gathering, and so I'm wondering if people's perceptions of film as a story are going to be more like the book, or less like the book, or more like their version of the book. I mean, it's hard to say.
I think it's fascinating how we devour TV shows these days. No more waiting for next week's episode or the week after. The box set is there, and we just sit and we devour the whole series in one go, or I do. And it's fascinating our hunger for that kind of thing and our impatience just to know what's going to happen next. And I suppose that's the difference with a book. You do spend some time, and you do spend that time alone and take your time and drink in the pages and get to know the characters. And you can only get through the story as fast as you can read and turn the pages. So I think they're both so different. But whether we enjoy them by reading or watching them alone, we still get that collective experience afterwards when we get to talk about the book or the TV show with our friends and discuss what was the meaning of that ending, and what do you think? And I think that's what's so much fun, and how it can still bring people together.
It does bring people together, and I've often talked to authors who are absolutely amazed at things that readers find in books or interpret in books that I often see, because we've done so many events over the years, and I sometimes see this look of real surprise when somebody will ask a question and the author will go, just for a moment, because you don't ever want to offend the person who asked the question, but you can see the author going, seriously? That's what you read in my book? But obviously that person did, and that's what makes it so much fun to have that group experience.
I have loved seeing readers' reactions to all of the books, and anyone who knows me will confess that I'm really bad with any form of technology. This is my first time doing anything like this. I've done a few Zooms with the family, doing quizzes or catch-ups or cocktail hours, but I haven't done anything like this before, so social media-wise, I'm not very good, but I do like Instagram. It's quite a recent development for me. I know it's been around for years, but seeing people's pictures of the books and reading what they thought of the books, it blows my mind. It means the world to me, it really does, and it's so strange, especially now in the current climate. I spend so much time in my little shed at the end of the garden, which is just up there, with my dog, and to know that I sit there writing these stories alone for months at a time, and then they're out there in the world and people are reading them and being so kind, it just means the world. It's amazing.
Well, it'll be fun for you, because we'll take a little piece of this conversation and put it on Instagram through IGTV. So you will be able to see yet another.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Although I don't like seeing myself too often. Not much of a selfie person, but I do like seeing pictures of the books. That's always good fun.
Right. Well, I think the technology. We're very fortunate that as this pandemic has struck us, that technology such as we're using at the moment had developed to the point where we could have this kind of conversation. Because without it, we'd all be lost. We wouldn't really be able to talk to each other. Authors would not be able to talk to fans. Booksellers would not be able to present books by authors. So it's fascinating to me that it all came together, at just this moment. And I was just.
I've been telling everyone in the UK that as part of my American book launch, I was visiting Arizona for the first time. This is very exciting. Even if it's a virtual visit, it's a very exciting thing to do.
The really good news for you is that it's 116.
Wow.
Which I can't translate to centigrade. I can't do the math, but I will say that for your first visit to Arizona, this is by far the better way to be doing it. We'll have to bring you over when you can travel again in the winter, and it'll work out better. So let's talk a little bit about his and hers. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I do think it's fascinating to look at the way that British and American publishers present novels. The book covers, are they the same? Are they different? How do you feel about the cover, for example?
I wish I had the UK one to show you. I've only got the American one here within reaching distance. Well, the American one is here with the trees. You can see just about maybe over here. I have this tree in my writing shed normally, and I have woods at the front of my house, and I have woods at the back of the cottage, and I'm surrounded by trees all of the time, and some of the story is set in the woods. So when the American publishers came up with this cover, I was over the moon actually. It looks very much like everything I see around me all the time. I just think it's so beautiful in the way the branches move up, and I think it's quite creepy and gives that hint of something a bit dark and twisty might be going on within the story. So that was very exciting. And the UK cover is of a friendship bracelet. It's quite simple, quite clean. I think it's quite clever. I really like that too. I think I'm quite easy to please actually. I'm just so thrilled that to have my stories made into books that people read. So every time I see a cover, it's just thrilling. It's so exciting. And I have a little bookshelf tucked away at home with all the different foreign covers on. And honestly, I love them all equally. I think they're all beautiful. I'm very lucky.
I think the different interpretations are fascinating. For example, I really love the ampersand in his and hers, and the fact that it's red. It reflects the structure of your book, because this is when you've chosen to write from alternate points of view. And
Yes.
I think that the cover and the ampersand prepare the reader for that idea. Why did you decide to tell the story from these two different points of view rather than a single?
I just think it's always fascinating how nobody ever really has one version of a story. There are always two sides to every story. Even what we're doing now, you might tell a friend later on that we had this chat, and your version of events might be completely different to my version of events, even though we're having the chat together. And I think that's just real life. And I think we never really know the truth about a story, when even our own version of the story is slightly manipulated, slightly misremembered sometimes. So I just wanted to explore that with his and hers, and give Anna a voice and Jack his own voice and his own interpretation of events, and then let readers decide who they wanted to believe.
And as you tell a story like this, you reveal so much of who they are at the moment, but also who they were, and how they came to this moment. I think it's a very interesting story structure, and it seems to work particularly well in a novel of suspense like this. There's an enormous number of books in this general field that we're calling domestic suspense or psychological suspense, and the choice of the structure and the narrators seems to me a key part of why people enjoy reading them. So I can imagine as an author that it would be fun for you to change it up and do it differently.
This one was so much fun to write. And there were days where I was having more fun with Anna, so I'd stick with Anna for a while, or days where Anna wasn't really behaving herself, and so I'd switch to Jack for a little bit. And it was funny how both characters would make me feel differently depending on who I was writing on that particular day. But I always like to plan ahead with my novels, with everything really. I think I'm one of those people who, if I didn't plan where I was going to go with the story, I'd be constantly worried about getting lost. So I have this giant board up in the writing shed, just up there, which I tend to plot the whole novel out before I start writing a word. And that helps me, A, not to get lost, but also it's just quite fun in terms of knowing where the story is going to go and dropping little clues along as I go.
So when you wrote it, did you write Anna's story separately from Jack's, or did you yourself write bits of one and then bits of the other as you moved along?
I knew where we were going the entire time. I'm really bad at spoilers, so I keep trying to edit myself to not give too much away. But it depended on the day. If I was having a really good Anna day, I would stick with Anna for a while and then come back to Jack later, and vice versa.
So, I mean, and you're in control of the book, you can always piece it together. I mean, you can write a lot of Anna, and then I remember years and years ago, I talked to an American author who wrote wonderful, very sexy romantic suspense, and I asked her once, about the sex scenes, and she said, I've always remembered that. She said, well, what I do, she said, is I have quite a few drinks and really get liquored up, and then I would write just reams of them, and then I could go in and take one, you know, and put it in the book. And I thought, what a good idea, you know, to be able to pursue while you were on, so to speak, turned on, so to speak, just spew it out, and then you could, because you know, you're in control of the story, so you could take whatever you thought would work in this particular book out of this kind of larger chunk and drop it in, and the reader would never know that.
I really like that idea. I normally write first thing in the morning. I've been known to go up to the shed at maybe 4 a.m. in the morning, so I've never had a drink at that time, but I might give it a whirl and see what happens with the story. It could be fun.
I meant to tell you, since you are on British time, which is, you're at 7:30 probably by
Yes.
now in the UK,
Yeah.
that you really could have brought a glass of wine to this conversation. It would have been fine. Sorry.
There's a bottle just hidden on the side of the camera with a big straw. Joking, not really. Next time, that's what I'll do.
So His and Hers has been called a masterpiece of misdirection. Samantha Downing, with whom we're going to be speaking today after Alice at noon Arizona time and 8 o'clock British time, has called His and Hers a stunning, addictive novel, captivating from beginning to end, which I think is a lovely conversation. Have you talked to Samantha in any one of these technological kinds of things?
No, you're my first. This is my first one of these. But Samantha and I have an event on Saturday, I think, which will be so exciting because we've never met virtually or otherwise. But I think we're fans of each other's work. I'm certainly a huge fan of her work. I've loved both of her books, so I'm really excited to get to meet her on Saturday, albeit like this.
It will be fun.
It'll be lovely.
You can actually tune into the link that I gave you when we're done and briefly watch Samantha if you want to.
Yeah,
it'd be kind of fun. So, among the many really great reviews that this book has had, I like this starred review. Bestseller Feeney surpasses the dexterous deviousness on display. Now, there's a really nice alliteration. In her 2018 debut, Sometimes I Lie, in this cunningly constructed psychological thriller centered on a bitterly divorced couple who are forced to cross paths again by a murder in Blackdown, Surrey, their hometown. Anna is a London BBC News correspondent. So it seems to me a certain amount of your own life has crept into this book, i.e. Surrey, where I believe you now reside.
Yes. So definitely the BBC side of things. Like, I promise all the characters are fictional, but I do think my experience as a producer and as a correspondent have hopefully gone into the book. And definitely the location. Blackdown is completely made up, but it's basically a combination of 3 real places that have merged inside my head. And Blackdown itself now seems so real to me, even though it isn't, that I'm actually setting another book there because, truth be told, I missed it. I missed it when I left visiting Blackdown in my imagination. So yes, it is funny how bits of real life do inevitably creep into every book, but I promise I'm not nearly as dark as my characters in real life.
You know, I think when you create a place like that, it does become real. You may not know a British author named Catherine Aird, who is much your senior, even my senior, as it all turns out. And she created a whole county she called Calashire County and set almost all of her perfectly wonderful police procedurals in this county. And it became, for her fans, a real county like Surrey or Sussex or something. So I can imagine that Blackdown would be a place that you would want to revisit.
And I suppose with every book, I spend so long there writing the book inside my head that these places do become quite real. And there's so much detail that never quite makes it into the book because otherwise the book would be too long. But I know it intricately, and I know all these little secret spots and secret places. And sometimes now, if I'm walking in the woods where part of the story is set, it's very confusing for me because I think, oh no, these woods are in Blackdown, and I have to remind myself that Blackdown isn't real, Blackdown is just something I made up in my imagination.
Yeah, but it's real to you. And, you know, your imagination is a place that you get to go visit, so why not Blackdown? Now, Anna draws upon your own life experience, but you've never been a detective chief inspector, so tell us a little bit about Jack, because he's somebody that you obviously had to do a bit of work to create.
I guess I've watched a lot of crime dramas and I've certainly read a lot of crime fiction. And I'm lucky enough to have some people with police experience in the family. So I had some people I could run things by and check whether or not I was using the right terminology or whether something would really happen that way in real life, which was fun. I'm very lucky to have. Actually, it's a very good resource. So I think Jack is one of those people whose life just hasn't quite gone according to plan. And I think we can all relate to that in some ways and sometimes when you get to a certain age and perhaps the things that you thought you were going to be and the things you thought you were going to do and the things you hope to achieve, maybe you haven't quite made it yet. And I definitely had periods of that in my life where I was desperate to try and do the thing that I really, really wanted to do. So I think that's where Jack comes from, really. That feeling of things aren't quite how you wanted them to be, but you're desperate to make them right.
Why is Jack in Blackdown?
So Jack has left. Again, I'll try and edit any spoilers out when I say it. But Jack used to work in London.
Right.
So Jack used to have a kind of quite successful role in the police in London. But his personal life experienced some very tragic things, and he felt the need to run away for lots of reasons, not just for himself, but he thought it was the right thing to do for other people in his life. So he's retreated, and he's retreated back to the place where he grew up when he was younger, even though it's somewhere where he never wanted to go back to, and he never pictured himself going back to. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. And I think that sometimes we all do that. Sometimes we all think that going back might be the best way forward, but it rarely is.
Well, you do, in order to have a BBC personality and a London detective meet up again in Blackdown, you had to give them reasons. There's no reason for us to give any spoilers by saying what they are, but you know, for the credibility of the story, they have to be there for a reason. And it's a story that that really wouldn't work in metropolitan London. I think that, you know, that it's important to recognize that stories need particular landscapes, and a very urban metropolitan one would not be the right one for his and hers.
No, it definitely needed a more rural countryside, slightly creepy setting in order for everything to work. And also, it represents going back to your past, and it represents how sometimes we can't escape our past, no matter how much we try to, or how far we run, or how much we try to lock away bad memories in little boxes inside our heads. Sometimes the past always has a way of finding you, or by accident, you might just find your own way back to it.
Well, his and hers is a sensational read, and so now I will ask the question that everybody always wants us to ask, which is, what are you working on next? Because readers always want to feel that, you know, this isn't the final appearance.
I had a deadline in lockdown, which was terrifying, but also quite useful because it kept me busy and kept my mind occupied. And I'm pleased to say that my next book will be out next spring. I can't tell you the title quite yet, even though I'd really like to. It's another dark and twisty thriller. And this one for me was particularly frightening to write. I think because of the subject matter, and I think because of the story, but also because of what was going on in the real world at the time when I was working on the final draft. I think all that fear and anxiety made its way into the next book. But I will tell you it's about a married couple, and they go on a journey together, and they end up staying in a house together in a rural corner of Scotland, and then they can't get out. And I won't tell you any more because it gave me nightmares writing this one, but I do hope people will enjoy it when it comes out next year.
Well, I'm sure we will. Scotland and Cornwall always seem to be places that authors like to send characters for scary experiences. I don't know why. Both, they're at the opposite ends. I myself have actually driven from Land's End to John of Groat's, and it's a. I mean, you could fit all of the UK in Arizona. So, from our standpoint, it's not such a long trip, except that the ability to move quickly is dramatically different. So, a journey from Cornwall to Scotland takes a lot longer than driving across Arizona. But I do understand that they kind of bookend, in the rural and isolation, they bookend a country, the United Kingdom, in a way that makes it, I think, a real lure for authors to head to one or the other when they want to do something that's isolated and pretty scary.
I think they're both such beautiful places. I spend a lot of time in both. Scotland's my particular favourite. I think Scotland's my favourite place on the planet, to be honest. I run away there at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. I spent a month in Scotland at the very start of this year, finishing next year's book. And maybe that's why I think a lot of writers do retreat to Scotland. And I think it's just so quiet and unspoilt and beautiful and remote. And I think that fear, for me, probably came from a trip I had there a couple of years ago, where I stayed in a converted church and was terrified. So I don't really feel scared when I'm there normally in real life, but it can be a scary place where nobody can reach you and you can't reach anybody else either. So I think that beauty and that isolation can sometimes be contradictory and just be wonderful, but also terrifying at the same time.
Very true. It also gives you an opportunity to weaponize weather, which both places do have extremes of and completely unpredictable weather. I had one more question to ask you before we move to the audience, and this is one that because I read the majority of crime fiction that's published every year, so I'm a lot immersed in what's coming out. Why are misdirections, unreliable narrators, and family dramas so popular at the moment? Do they reflect a kind of shift in culture, or are they aiming at what is perceived as the larger audience? Do you have any thoughts about why your books are so appealing?
Thank you. I read a lot of crime drama too, and a lot of psychological thrillers, and I think I only can really answer why I love reading them. And I think it's just like going on a roller coaster ride. You get that sort of slow ride at the start, and you're building up to something, and you're a bit scared, and it can be a bit twisty, and it might get a little bit dark. But you just hope that by the end it's going to be this thrilling experience, even if you don't quite know where it's taking you. And I also think with thrillers, especially psychological thrillers, but the whole crime genre, it's like a puzzle. It's like this crazy little puzzle with all the pieces, and you can see all the pieces, and the author shows you all the pieces, and it's just this challenge about whether or not you can cleverly slot them into the right place in the right order and figure things out as you go along. So I always think it's a fun puzzle, and sometimes I solve them when I read them, and sometimes I don't. But either way, I have a great time while I'm reading the books.
That's a lovely answer. Thank you. I'm going to ask Patrick if he has questions from the audience, and I just want to make a quick apology. I am wearing sunglasses here, not to be glamorous, but because I've had eye surgery, and I really didn't think that you all want to share that experience with me, so that's why I'm in dark glasses. So Patrick, have we got any questions you want to forward here?
Just a couple. Let's see here. Hi, Alice. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Hello.
Hey, nice to meet you virtually here. Yes, Dan asks, are there any emerging British authors that you enjoy that might not be as well known here in the United States?
Ooh, there is a book that has come out very recently called Precious You by an author called Helen Monks Takar, and I don't know whether that's being published in America, but I loved that book. I thought that was such a thrilling debut this year. So if you can get your hands on that one and you fancy a psychological thriller that's a bit different, that could be for you. Samantha Downing, I think, is huge there anyway. She's writing terrific thrillers. I've read both of her books, devoured both of her books. As emerging talents go, I don't think they get much bigger than her. I think she's a fantastic author and one to watch. And there is a book coming out later this year, a debut book. I'm just trying to remember what it's called. I remember the blurb more than I can remember the book. It's I think they described it as Room Meets Gone Girl. It'll come back to me, but it's by a German author. What? Sorry? Dear Child. My husband can hear me in the other part of the house, and I've been telling everybody about this book because it was just so creepy and chilling and different. Barbara, you'll know there are a lot of thrillers out there that sometimes feel a bit the same. This book was not the same. This book felt terrifyingly brilliant and wonderful and original. So I'd recommend that one, which is out later this year.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm going to throw in one of my own because my favorite book of the entire summer, excluding, of course, his and hers, is a book called Fresh Water for Flowers, translated from the French. Honestly, I recommend it to you highly. It's published by Europa. The author's name is Valérie Perrin, and I've never read anything like it. I've never read anything like the structure, like the characters. It's the most immersive reading experience that I have had in ages. And since you like different reading experiences, Fresh Water for Flowers by Perrin.
Adding it to my list right now. Sounds terrific.
Honestly, I just can't say enough good things about it. I found it so different than anything else that I have read, and that doesn't occur to me very often. The other thing I would say is that there are fewer men writing books like this. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, and I'm not even sure that's his real name, to be honest. I'm trying to remember. Is one that has been a big hit in this country. Are there any men that you recommend that you've been reading?
I think there are a lot of brilliant male authors out there, but you're right. It is mostly women who seem to be writing these big thrillers recently. Alex North, I don't know if you're familiar with. He did The Whisper Man last year, and his latest book is very high on my to-be-read pile. It's sitting there winking at me most days. I'm very excited to read it. I think it has a different name there. Shadow Friends, maybe?
I think so. Actually, yours is our July British Crime Club book, and his book was our June one. So,
there you go. Great minds think alike. So I think he's written some great novels in the last couple of years.
He has. I really like The Silent Patient and The Whisper Man, and I think you're right. I think it's Sorrow's End or some such thing. Anyway, to whoever asked that question, he's an author that you could certainly want to look up and read. Another question?
Let's see here. Trying to make this into a good question. I guess the actual question is, what do you feel is the main difference between a British set mystery and an American set mystery? And Barbara can probably answer that too. But do you read many American authors, and do you kind of identify a British sensibility in crime writing that's different from the American model?
That's a very good question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. Yes, I guess sometimes you can pick up on the differences in tone and language sometimes as well. But in terms of the storytelling, they all seem good to me. I enjoy them all. And in terms of setting, it never really bothers me where a story is set, whether it's set here or in America, or I just read a brilliant thriller that's coming out soon, actually, set in Norway. Terrific. Really frightening. Gave me goosebumps. Fantastic. So I think for me it's often about character, and it's about plot, it's about the story, and I guess for me it's mostly about the twists. I love a good twist. So no, I think it's all good. I enjoy books set everywhere.
I could add one comment to that, because I have read so many of them recently. I think that the British books in this particular area tend to be a lot heavier on child rearing, child minding, child care, and it's a different culture than American in terms of bringing up children, and there's some terminology that's really quite different. Several of the books have been prompted by infertility issues, a desire to have children or not to have children. We're going to be speaking to Adele Parks in a few minutes with Samantha Downing, and her book really depends upon fertility issues. And you have national health care, we do not. And so I think maybe there's a more common experience in Britain in dealing with matters like that than they are in this country, which is much more fragmented. I'm not sure, but I have noticed that there is a very heavy concentration in the last few months on books from the UK that have depended in great part upon rearing children, caring for children, losing children, harming children. So that's the big difference that I see. Anything else to wind up on?
No.
All right. Alice, this has been a pleasure. I hope it hasn't been terrifying for you.
It's been lovely. It's been a really enjoyable experience, and I've loved seeing the bookstore in the background, and I'm pretending I'm there in real life.
Well, I can take a little video and send it to you, which I think would be very nice. So I'm going to say goodbye to our Facebook audience. Hang on for just a minute after I do. Thank you for joining us. It's really been so wonderful to have this magical first moment with Alice. And I can't say enough good things about his and hers and her earlier books. So I hope that if she's not an author you have read, that you will take this opportunity to discover her work. Also, if you have time, stay with us because we're going to be talking to Samantha Downing, Stephanie Roble, and Adele Parks, who are writing interesting books that I think you will also find fascinating. So, bye.